On today's show, Laura Heywood interviews.
Currently represented on Broadway with Jagged Little Pill, producer and multi-hyphenate Vivek Tiwary. Welcome to Laura Heywood Interviews. I'm Laura Heywood, and I've just returned from several weeks on the road, so this may be the first time you're hearing my voice in a bit. I'm so excited to be back live on DNR Studios. Just as a reminder, if you're listening to the free podcast version, you can always listen live and get every interview a week earlier by subscribing at dnrstudios.com/Laura. I hope you're staying warm wherever you are. Here in New York, we are bracing for yet another big snowstorm, although I don't think the last one actually ever stopped. 2 days ago, I was in Northern California, and the storm almost kept me away from my beloved New York City. I had a flight Saturday night that was delayed nearly 6 hours that barely made it out of SFO, and thank goodness it did, because I landed just a few hours before heading to the Broadhurst Theater for the matinee of Jagged Little Pill. You might know the name Jagged Little Pill. In fact, I'm sure you do, because it's an iconic Alanis Morissette album from the 1990s, but it is also a totally mind-blowing new musical inspired by that album, featuring songs from the iconic Alanis Morissette, not just from Jagged Little Pill, but from her entire catalog, and actually including a couple of new songs. And it's a rock show that's also somehow an intimate family portrait. It's got a brand new story by Oscar-winning screenwriter Diablo Cody and is directed by Tony-winner Diane Paulus, featuring a cast that is somehow both young and fresh and seasoned and experienced, a true ensemble without a weak link among them. How did this team find each other, and how did this particular album, which changed so many of our lives in and since the 90s, make its way to the Broadway stage? Well, my guest today knows all the details because he's been there since the beginning. You might even say it was his idea. Vivek Tiwary, welcome to Laura Heywood Interviews.
Hi, Laura. So nice to see you.
It's so nice to see you, too.
Chatting with you again. It's been too long.
Well, it's funny because we actually met very shortly after your name was attached to Jagged Little Pill for the very first time. In a former life, I was a talent booker at Sirius XM Radio, and you came in to promote your graphic novel, The Fifth Beatle, which is about Brian Epstein, whose story is remarkable.
Thank you.
And a little later, since we have a full hour, I'm hoping we can talk about Brian and the idea of historical mentors, which I know you're really
awesome.
Like,
yeah,
which is sort of your. From the research I've done, is like it's like your recurring TED Talk. The idea that someone from history can be a mentor, whether or not you actually met them. But so I remember in 2013, there was some Broadway site had been like, okay, somebody's optioned Jagged Little Pill. And at the time, so I don't know how much you know about my history, but at the time I had this corporate job at Sirius XM where I was very embedded in pop culture, and I was very into Broadway as like a side, like a hobby, but I had this secret identity called Broadway Girl who was anonymous on the internet. And so I was really plugged into to what was going on, and you came in to promote the graphic novel, and I was like, what's going on with the album? And you wouldn't say anything. Like, what's going on with the show? You just said stay tuned, and that was all I could get out of you from it.
That's so funny. That was 2013?
I think so.
Yeah.
Isn't that when...
It's very likely. I mean, this process started a little over 8 years ago.
Wow.
So I was probably already about 2 years into it by the time I was telling you. I couldn't give you any more details.
Well, it was whenever you were doing press for The Fifth Beatle.
Yeah. It was probably somewhere around
and
there.
I think what probably happened is that some line got signed, some like T's got crossed and I's got dotted that either got leaked or announced to the press. But.
Well, we did announce it probably somewhere around 5 or 6 years ago, but it's taken that long to kind of get it together, and with this creative team. Thank you for all the kind words you just said about it, but we worked really hard to put that creative team together and get that cast together, and these are super talented people who also have very busy schedules, and I think it was worth the wait to wait to get all those folks freed up and able to do it. And I think So I'm very proud of all that, but it does take time. And, anyone who's listening, who's, followed the path of Broadway shows, for a show to take an original new musical to take about 8 years to get off the ground is actually not that unusual.
Yeah, no.
In my world, that's...
I think you just had other projects you wanted to discuss at the moment.
Probably.
So, there's something you just said that I don't want to gloss over, which is you said it was worth waiting for everybody to be available.
Yeah.
But I know that that's not actually the story. Like with Diablo Cody, didn't she pass, or didn't her people pass on her behalf?
That's a good question. And you know, to be fair to her people, I wouldn't exactly say that they passed, which is part of why I never gave up. But I did first sit down with Alanis about 8 years ago to discuss this project. And one of the things that I said in that first meeting, in addition to the fact that I did not want it to be about her life, you know, we're not telling Alanis Morissette's bio story.
The Star Search scenes really would have been fun, though.
She's lived a very interesting life, but I with a few exceptions, I find bio musicals not all that interesting, if I can be honest, with some notable exceptions. But so I didn't want to do that, and we wanted to set a piece that would be set in contemporary days and revolving around an ensemble cast, a modern family, so it wasn't going to be a 90s period piece either, and would force the audience to confront uncomfortable truths, and through community and love, find your way to a place not just of survival, but of hope and eventually happiness. And I think that that's the legacy of the album. I think that's the message of the album, is it forced its listeners back in the 90s when it came out to deal with the uncomfortable truths that were in their life, to find power and support through your loved ones, and to fight your way to a place of happiness and empowerment and hope. And that's what I tried to do with this piece.
I'm gonna interrupt you as little as possible, but I have so many strong feelings about the album, and like it hit at exactly the right moment in my life. I was
not alone.
I was 16 in 1995, and I felt like it was my heart like barfing out. Like this album somehow was. I shouldn't use the word barf because that's gross, but I mean it was like it came out of me as an explosion that I didn't even know this stuff was inside me until I heard. I'm going to start saying Alanis now because I've been saying Alanis my entire life, but you know her, so I'm assuming that you're saying it right, and I've been saying it wrong.
She's not. She's lovely and not picky.
But
yes,
I want to say it how
right.
she says it, Alanis. So yeah, I think it wasn't just about like teaching people; it was about reflecting people and what so many of us were going through at that time.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and I hope that sort of nutshell description sounds inspirational and uplifting, but it doesn't necessarily sound like a whole lot of fun, right? And so in that first meeting I had, that was my other note, was that like I want to make sure that what we do in telling that story is also going to be fun and funny. And you know, in order to accomplish that, we should look outside the box of just traditional musical theater writers, like people like Diablo Cody. I mean, that was literally a name that I dropped in that very first lunch that we had 8 years ago. And
was that right around the time Juno came out, or was it?
No, I think Juno was significly before that.
Okay, got it. It's funny
I don't
because
know my chronology so well, but
Juno
was
me neither. But
that.
actually, back in my old radio life, I shouldn't say that because I'm still doing radio, but like. Diablo Cody, when her first book, Candy Girl, came out, she was a regular guest on one of my radio shows. She came on every Friday for a segment about fetishes, believe it or not.
So you know, I mean, she's lovely. And this is what she does.
And
she talks about uncomfortable issues and makes them funny. Like Juno is about teen pregnancy, but it's funny. You know, United States of Terror is about mental illness, but it's funny. You know? And that's really what she does. And so we did reach out to her very early on in the process, you know, maybe not 8 years ago, but probably close to. And, you know, while this was certainly after Juno, it was also before Diablo had conquered television, if you will. And so, you know, sure enough, her agents who are now friends of mine, but at the time, you know, I didn't know them that well. In particular, Sarah Self, who's her main agent at WME, who's a very good friend of mine now. But you know, Sarah got back to me, and she, you know, I don't want to say she just flat out passed, but she said, you know, it's not the right time, and you know, I respect that. You know, Diablo was very involved in television, and having done some work in TV, I know how all-encompassing and engrossing that is. And if your mission is to sort of, you know, break into television, you need to really focus on that. So. But reading through the lines, I got the sense that this was not a pass. This was like not the right time kind of message, and it wasn't said in so many words, but that's what I took away from it. And so we never gave up, and we went back to her several years later, and as the show had gone through lots of other stops and starts. And it went back to Diablo at a time after which she had already done some work with Tom Kitt, who's our orchestrator and arranger. And when her name circled back around, Tom said, "Oh, you know, I know her personally. We just did something together, so I can put you on the phone with her directly."
Doesn't that just make life easier? When a Pulitzer Prize winner happens to know the Oscar-winning writer that you want.
Yeah, and so we circled back around to her, and the timing was right. So yes, in a way that we could have easily have moved on. I could have taken that message from her agent as a pass. It could have been, certainly another producer might have viewed that as a pass.
Right.
I did not. I viewed it as this is not the right time, and understanding the entertainment industry, I know timing is everything, and so I tucked it away. I wasn't going to be a pain in Sarah's butt and keep pushing it. I got it, but we moved forward. We moved on.
Yeah.
And we did not find the right writer, and a few years had passed, and it's time to look back into Diablo.
Well, moving
sure
forward
enough,
and moving on,
right.
I think might be an important semantic difference, because it sounds like you didn't necessarily move on. You put a pin in it and moved forward without scratching her off.
That's
your
right.
list.
That's right. But this is the sort of art of production, right? Really, So it is somewhere between moving on and moving forward.
Sure.
Because we looked at other writers, we met with other writers, we had treatments that were being developed with other writers.
Oh my gosh!
Just because
I so badly want to know who those people are, but I'm not asking.
Because you can't wait blindly. You
Right.
can't just assume one day Diablo will be ready. So we of course had to do our jobs and look into other folks, but nothing ever connected the way I felt that she would. And as soon as there was an opportunity to go back to her, knowing that time had passed and we had a personal connection and it might be the right moment, we took it. And sure enough, she was super excited. And you've probably spoken to her since then or read stuff
I
about
actually
her.
hadn't seen her in 10 years until the press event that you guys did at Haswell Greens, where we got to actually hear some of the music for the first time in New York City. I also saw the show at the ART. So getting to see it on the big Broadway stage and see how the ART is the American Repertory Theater, which is at Harvard, where Diane Paulus is the artistic director. And so getting to see how it had changed and moved in those 3 incarnations, if you consider the little mini press peak.
Yeah.
But I want to just stop and say one of the reasons I wanted to have you in particular on this show is because of how much I've followed your philosophies over the course of the 7 years since I first met you when you were doing The Fifth Beatle, and I only probably recognized your name because it was so unusual, at least in my sort of white world. I didn't know anybody else named Vivek. So when I saw you were coming in, I was like, oh my gosh, that's the guy. But I know that you I am. This show, I called Laura Heywood Interviews instead of the Broadway Girls show, because I don't always just want to talk about Broadway. And when I do talk about Broadway, my main passion in life is growth mindset and the idea that there's no such thing as failure. You just learn lessons, and that that progress is more important than results, and that as long as you keep putting one foot in front of the other, you will get somewhere, even if it's not where you thought you initially were going. I just recently did a TEDx Broadway talk on this at the same event where Arvin David spoke about being an immigrant on Broadway, and I know you and he are partners on a lot of projects, and I love that. I think that I know I mentioned this already. I'm just kind of stuck on the semantic but truly significant difference between the idea of moving forward and moving on. And I know that it seems like such a little thing, but when we frame things in our minds as pushing forward and seeing where the journey takes us instead of what we lost when we tripped on that rock behind us on the path. I don't know. I think that is why you're here. It's not just because somebody said, hey, do you want a guy who can tell you the story of Jagged Little Pill? I was like, I want this guy because he made Jagged Little Pill despite all of the reasons that everyone else would have stopped making Jagged Little Pill before it got to Broadway.
Yeah, or I don't want to sound like I'm patting myself on the back,
or
would never have gotten the rights in the first place.
Yeah.
Alanis has said this on record that other people had approached her and wanted to tell her life story, and she wasn't interested in that. I'm pretty sure that I'm the first person who ever said, I love and respect this record, and I want to tell a new and original and timely story with it. I don't want to tell your life story, but which is, by the way, an inspiring life story. But that's not what I want to do here.
Right.
And that was not the easy way out, to approach Alanis and say, I want to adapt Jagged Little Pill. I want to set it in not in the 90s, but in the current day. I want to have it deal with a modern family, not a female singer-songwriter that's a loosely veiled biography on you. I wanted to deal with important pressing issues of the day. I wanted to force the audience to face uncomfortable truths.
You're doing
and
all
I
the
want
same...
it to be funny.
Yeah, you're doing all the same things now.
That's the hardest task I could have set out for myself.
Sure.
But it was the right one.
Well, and you did
I think
all the
audiences
things
are agreeing now.
That the album did then, you're doing now. And
well, thank you. That's a high praise.
Yeah.
I hope so. I hope.
Yeah, you
thank
are. This show tackles a lot of issues kind of simultaneously and woven together. And one of the things that I think it does so well is weaving those things into a kind of tapestry instead of making it seem kind of like a jumbled soup of what am I supposed to care about in this moment. I love...
It's real. It's the real world.
Well, sure,
right?
yeah. But I mean, in art sometimes,
like
you either have the adoption musical or you have the racism musical or you have the empowerment musical, or you have the drug addiction musical, or you have the accountability and Me Too, movement musical. This is all of those things, and that again, like you said before, it feels like, oh my gosh, that's a lot, but there are so many laughs.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that rather than being one of those issues musicals that you pointed out, that we're the real life musical. We the reason that all those things are in there is because all those things are in the real world.
Right.
The real world is not just a place of one issue. It's a place where there are a number of issues, but it's also a place where through community you can find hope and happiness and love and support. That's the real world, and that's a message that I think, especially in 2019 and moving into 2020, the entire world could remember that. You could use a reminder of that message, that we have a lot of issues ahead of us in the next few years in the real world, but that we can get through them if we lean on the people that we love and trust and respect and focus on our community. We will do more than survive. We will find hope and we will thrive.
Yeah.
And that, I hope, is the ultimate message of Jagged. If I've done my job correctly, that is the ultimate message of this musical.
So you are you're so your talking points, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way. What I mean is you're so clear on the vision and the mission of this show. How are you feeling? Where is the what does Vivek talk about when he's not on a microphone about what's going on with Jagged Little Pill? Is it a huge amount of relief to just have it on the stage and to be able to just let it live outside of you right now? If you weren't quote unquote promoting the show, how are you feeling right now?
I feel great. And the thing is, it's not, relief is not the right word, at least not for me, because one of the things that I love about theater is that theater is a living, breathing organism, right? Every show is different by definition. It's live. Every show, the actors do it slightly differently just because they're human beings. They're not robots. Every performance is going to be slightly different, and every audience is going to be different, and the actors have a feedback mechanism with the audience. So really, I think that when you witness a piece of great theater, you're witnessing a magical moment in time. But as a producer, as somebody that is working on the business side to create those theatrical moments, you're never done. Because the moments they change. Every moment is different. So it's not as though we're celebrating opening night on Thursday. So after Thursday, it's a relief because now the show is what it is and I can just focus on marketing it. I mean, it doesn't work that way. And that's what I love about it is that the show continues to grow and breathe. And this show in particular, I think interacts with its times,
I was going to ask you about that. It's set in modern times. If you told me it was set at, in December of 2019, I would believe you. I think that, a show like that is so that it is, but I'm not articulating this question very well, but what's going to happen if it's still running in 2025? I can't imagine you're going to update it so it feels more like 2025. Does it become a period piece about 2019, 2020 in the same way that Jagged Little Pill is still relevant and viscerally evocative now, but is kind of a portrait of what life was like in 1995, 96?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the reason that the album is still so relevant and still so beloved is that it doesn't feel like a period piece. You know, I mean, it doesn't feel like when you put it on, it might bring back memories. You know, it might be, you know, music brings back sense memories and recalls moments in time. So it might remind you of the 90s. But I don't think it feels like a 90s period piece the way some albums feel like a period of their time. And that's what I'm hoping that we have done with Jagged Little Pill. And when we talk about shows that we would like to emulate, we don't look at jukebox musicals like Mamma Mia or Moving Out, and I don't mean that with any disrespect. It's just not the model that we're looking at. I look at shows like Hair and Rent, you know, shows that when they were created were very much a piece of their time,
right?
But have also proven to be timeless. You know, you don't go
Yes,
back and look at
and-
those pieces and say like, oh, that's, you know, I'm looking at this as a historical relic from back
You don't-
then. You
you
can
don't look
still
at
relate
Rent-
to the emotions that are in it. And that's the heart of the story.
But
is like,
Rent went from being like a groundbreaking portrait of its times to being a period piece without ever closing. Like, I think
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
But yeah, and I mean, now we're getting very, very geeky into musical.
Yeah,
musical theater history.
that's what we
But like,
do.
you know, Rent itself was inspired by La Boheme,
Right.
You know, and La Boheme was about the tuberculosis crisis, right? But what's great about La Boheme is it's also similarly it's a period of its moment.
Yeah.
You know, when its creatives were dealing with tuberculosis, and that was a current scare. But guess what? It can be revived in 2020,
Right.
and people can still relate to it.
Totally.
They can relate to the concept of illness and struggle and feeling like lost in the world without the community that you're with and missed connections and all these very human emotions. And that's what I hope we're doing with Jagged Little Pill. We're creating something that, you know, in 2025, to answer your question, doesn't need to be updated because the emotions, the issues that really underlie the piece will be timeless. And
have you found that the name Jagged Little Pill has been like, it's your strongest selling point, but does it also confuse people and think that it's just going to be a straight through like rock opera the way that Green Day's American Idiot was, which you also worked on? Have you had to like, I always, whenever I talk about Jagged Little Pill, I want to say it also has new songs. It's
Well, thank you
not
for pointing
just
that out.
Jagged Little Pill, the album on stage with a story like lightly woven through it. The songs are not in the same order. They don't necessarily have the same relevant, you know, the same narrative. They've got, you know, there are lyrical updates that make them more relevant to the story as opposed to
That's correct.
squeezing the story into the music. And I wonder whether that's been a marketing challenge to get people to understand that they're not just going to see the album on stage. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, because I saw American Idiot 10 times. So.
Well, thank you for that as well. I appreciate that. But you're absolutely right. And for the record, for anyone who's listening that doesn't know, it is called Jagged Little Pill, and it does have all the songs from the Jagged Little Pill album on it. It also has a number of songs from the rest of Alanis's body of work. And most exciting to me as a fan, and also as the producer of this piece, she has indeed written new music, new songs specifically for Jagged Little Pill. All reasons why I think it is not what people traditionally think of when they use the term jukebox musical. Like, I don't think this is a jukebox musical. Personally, I think it's an original musical using timeless songs, and that to me is a very different definition than what I personally think of as a jukebox musical. But back to your question about marketing, you know, I don't. Yeah, it goes back to sort of some of this philosophy you and I were talking about earlier about like not really believing in failure. You know, so I wouldn't necessarily call it a challenge, but it was part of our marketing mission, right? Is that, and this is also, you know, the marketing of a live theater piece changes, much like a theater itself. It is a living, breathing organism, our marketing campaigns. You know, so in the early days when the piece was just announced and there was nothing else to go on, then yes, we very much, a part of our marketing and PR strategy was to make sure people knew that we were not telling Alanis's life story, that we were working with a creative writer like Diablo Cody, who was going to inject some humor into it and was going to tell a new and original story, because that's what Diablo does. She comes up with new and original stories. So that was very, very important for everyone to know. As the piece opened at ART and got out into the world and the social media buzz was there and people started talking about what it was, we felt that it was still important to lean into letting people know that it was not just about Alanis that it was not about Alanis and not set in the 90s. But we had a lot of help. We had a lot of people who were already talking about it, and the word of mouth was getting out there. So the marketing strategy shifted a little bit. You know, so you basically just have to kind of keep updating your strategy to reflect what's out there in the world.
Yeah.
Right. If you're noticing that most people think it's about Alanis, then we have to lean into a strategy that lets people know it's not about Alanis. Yeah. You know, one of the things I'm really proud of is that a lot of young people who didn't grow up with the album are coming to see the show because they hear it's great and they hear it deals with modern issues that they may be going through, and that it's a youthful and edgy and exciting musical. So young people are coming who don't realize that it's based on an album from the 90s, who walk out thinking that I'm dead serious. There are people who
never heard of Jagged
people who
Little
come
Pill?
out and pick up the record afterwards.
Well, I believe that, but I don't believe that anybody has never heard that of the album.
There are people who have come out of this piece thinking that those songs were written for us, and I'm really proud of that. You know, thinking that Diablo Cody collaborated.
If they lived in a bubble,
they've heard of Alanis. They've heard of Alanis
Okay,
and her influence, but they think that she and Diablo Cody collaborated on this,
and
that the songs are new, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, I would. The songs are definitely musical theater songs in a way that not every rock album can be made.
For sure.
Musical theater. But it's not like they sound like they should have jazz hands after them. They just are very inherently dramatic.
Yeah.
And there are enough storyline points that while they might not have sounded like they were a story when I first listened to them, except maybe a story about my own life and art, the story that Diablo has created touches it. It makes it sound like the songs were written for the story instead of the other way around.
And there are people who did not grow up with that record, and that's what they think.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of that. And that to give credit where it's just due, that's Diablo Cody. That's the magic of her story. And also, you know, you talked about the music and having it, interpreted in a way that feels like musical theater songs. It doesn't feel like cheesy jazz hands. And to give credit where that's due, that's Tom Kitt.
Yeah,
he
did all the orchestrations.
He's our orchestrator, arranger, musical director, musical guru, and genius. And you know, he's won a Pulitzer and a Tony for Next to Normal. The guy's incredible. He also happens to be one of my dearest, oldest friends in the world. So
wait, how old? How long?
We've known each other since
back?
college. I mean, literally, they're freshman year.
Did he
of
go
college.
to Wharton?
He did not. He was at Columbia, but we had mutual friends, and we met literally in our college days.
Like before either of you had.
Oh yeah, I mean, I could tell the nights, late night bottle of red wine, dreaming about doing what we're doing now. Talking about our plan to work in music and theater and
so that's the stories that I want, like not specific stories about you and Tom Kitt or like what you were saying, we could do an hour-long commercial for Jagged Little Pill, but I want to know I want the stripped back. Let's talk about let's talk about how you got to where you are, because again, I've watched the TED Talk. I know about how Brian. So I'm going to tell you.
I'll tell you, doing something a little in between, talking about it through the context of Jagged Little Pill. I say that this is the piece is about, a family finding hope and empowerment through each other. I mean, that's also kind of the story of the creation of this piece. I just said I've known Tom Kitt since college. He and I go way back. As I said, we were building our careers together, staying up late, drinking red wine, dreaming about the future.
Yeah.
Diane Paulus, our director, I've known her since high school. She went to Brearley, an all-girls school here in New York. I went to collegiate, an all-boys school here in New York. Our schools were brother-sister schools. She was a little bit older than me, so I won't claim that we hung out a lot in high school. But I've literally known her since then. And her husband, Randy, went to collegiate with me. He was, again, a few years older, but one of my classmates. Back then, there were not a lot of kids coming out of our circle of friends that were working in theater. And so we all kind of knew each other and supported each other. And I would like to say we grew up together in the industry. Yeah. So Diane to me is family. Tom Kitt to me is family. Diablo Cody, as we discussed earlier, Kitt really ended up joining this piece through a personal connection to Tom. Mm-hmm. So that's family. I mean, we really put together a creative team that feels like a family. We toss that word around a lot, and it's not marketing. It's the truth. This is not a cast, it's not a company, it's not a crew, it's a family. And I think the actors would tell you the same thing. They came together at ART, and there's been virtually no changes between ART and Broadway, and a few additions, because now we need more things like more coverage, and so we've added a few ensemble members. But we have a family, and we didn't want to break up that family, and I think that's kind of how I've tried to live my life. where I've gotten to where I've gotten in the entertainment industry has been a mixture of I think that the two core things are passion and persistence. Not really believing in roadblocks, not really believing in challenges, not believing in failures, but believing that everything is an opportunity. And if you're passionate about what you're doing, then those opportunities feel like fun. It's like, how do we get through this thing we're facing right now? Well, if I love it enough, then I won the lottery. If this is what I get to do with my days, is to figure this stuff out. And then being persistent, because certainly in my career, all the projects I've worked on have taken a number of years to get off the ground. You mentioned Fifth Beatle. I started researching that one in college in like 1991. So that's a decades in the making project. But I wouldn't have it any other way. Like I genuinely believe that if you are passionate and persistent about the things that you do in your life, and you surround yourself by people that care about you and that you respect, you can make any of your dreams come true. Yeah. And I know that sounds a little bit like a self-help talk, but I really believe that.
Self-help is so underrated. Like I avoided self-help for so long because I was like, I don't need help. I'm a natural. I was a gifted kid. I was just like, if I had to get help in any way, that would be an indication that I was subpar to begin with, and I would never want to let anybody think that I needed improving. And now I'm like, let's go. Give me all the self-help books. I may have been born bright and I may be a natural, but I could still get better. You know who works with coaches every day? LeBron James. You know who works with coaches every day? Bill Gates. People who are great and want to get greater work with coaches. That's self-help. And that change for me happened when I read Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, which is about, like, I grew up with a fixed mindset. I am either great or I'm not, and I'm going to just live in this idea that I'm great and cross my fingers that people believe in it rather than show any weakness or room for, I thought learning was for, like, inferior people, because if I was really valuable, then I would already know the stuff. So I took easy classes because I wanted to be a straight A student instead of actually learning anything, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you seem to have grasped really early that you grew up in a more growth mindset way where you were like, what if I try this? What if I try this? Maybe it won't work. I know that from my research that when you started researching the Fifth Beatle, it wasn't like, I'm going to write a graphic novel. It was like, right. I want to do well in business. So I'm going to study, to keep myself interested, I'm going to study the guy who was on the business side of the Beatles. And instead of in addition to reading all the books, you thought, well, what if I just use the phone book, the literal phone book, and start calling people he knew?
That's exactly right.
And there is a line from I think it's from an interview, it might be from your TED Talk about it, where you say, I was too naive to be intimidated, or I was too excited to be intimidated.
Right. I was so excited I forgot to be intimidated.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. And that's passion and persistence.
If we could
exactly
all live that way.
Yeah, I mean, I was at Wharton in 1991, dreaming about working in the arts and entertainment industries. Wharton in 1991 doesn't have resources for young people who are interested in the arts and entertainment industries. That's changed. They do now, and I go back and guest lecture a lot myself, so I try to be one of those resources. But back then, it was just a reality. This was also before the internet boom, so they weren't even encouraging their students to go into media, much less into the arts, And so I had to do that research on my own. I thought, if I'm going to be an entrepreneur working in music and theater, I need to study this stuff on my own. And believing that Brian and the Beatles wrote and then rewrote the rules of the pop music business, that's what led me to a study of Brian Epstein. And when I realized there were no good books on Brian, there were no books on Brian, period. My book, The Fifth Beatle, is the only book about Brian Epstein in print, graphic novel or otherwise.
Why graphic novel instead of novel? I mean, instead of memoir? I mean, I know it is a memoir, but or I guess memoir is the wrong word, biography.
Yeah.
Why comic form?
Yeah, so I guess the probably the easiest and most honest answer is I love comics.
That is the best. That's not the easiest answer. That's the best answer.
Well, thank you.
Because true great works, true groundbreaking works come from intersections. If we take two things we're obsessed with and find out where they match, that's where human beings are unique. Every idea might have been thought of, but not every combination of ideas has been combined. So don't sell yourself short on that.
Thank you for
it's
that.
It's not an easy answer.
No, it's, and it goes back to this, what I keep saying, passion and persistence. I'm passionate about comic books, and I know it takes a long time to get a comic book off the ground. So I had to be passionate and persistent about that choice. There are other reasons. The other thing is that the Fifth Beatle, as you know, it's an 120-page graphic novel. And I kept thinking about the airport bookstore. I wanted to write a book that you could see at an airport bookstore. You could pick it up, you could flip through it, and you could think, wow, I could finish this by the time my flight lands. The artwork in the book is gorgeous. I'm not the artist. Andrew Robinson and Kyle Baker are my artists, and they did breathtaking work on it. So they'll see that the art is great. Maybe if you don't care about the Beatles, you're not even a comic book fan, you see that it's $15. It's an easy thing to pick up and read in a couple of hours. You might just give it a chance, right? That was part of my mission here, is I wanted people to know the story of Brian Epstein. Now, if I had gone and written a 300-page prose biography, now there's a lot of Beatles fans out there who might have bought that book, and it might have become a bestseller and might have made some money and justified its existence. But it takes a lot of time and effort to read a 300-page prose biography.
You never know. Lin-Manuel Miranda picked up an 800-page
prose
prose biography.
That's fair enough. But that took, that's part of what's magical about that story.
Right.
Is that Lin found the time to read a doorstop about Alexander Hamilton. Most people wouldn't be like, yeah, I'm going to spend the next however many hours of my life reading this.
He chose it for his tropical vacation. At least that's the lore.
That's part of what's magical about that story, But like a 120-page graphic novel, you can read that in an hour and a half.
Right.
And that was part of what I wanted to achieve there. And I think reading comics is fun. I also wanted it to be a fun read. So those are kind of all the reasons I picked that.
Where do we stand on the on-screen version of The Fifth Beatle? Because I've heard it referenced as a film. I've heard it referenced as a TV series. I haven't heard anything lately about it.
Yeah, so it is being developed for television. The rumors there are true, and I can say very recently I've been out in LA in between my nights at the Broadhurst Theater checking in on Jagged Little Pill. I've been out in LA pitching it to television, so we're at a very, very exciting place for the Fifth Beatle.
Worth mentioning that you've actually been granted the rights for the songs.
That is correct.
Which is if not rare, an unheard of thing. I mean, Julie Taymor got them for Across the Universe, but Beatles songs are almost never licensed.
Yeah, and it's notable that this is the first and only time in history that the Beatles have given their music rights to a piece about the band. Across the Universe, as you know, was a fantasy. It wasn't about the Beatles.
No, it was almost like...
It was a fantasy. It wasn't about the band's history. Whereas the Fifth Beatle is very much, it really is about Brian Epstein, but it is also a bit of a Beatles origin story. And if you look at other Beatles films like Backbeat or Nowhere Boy, you'll see that they've not granted music to those projects. So it is a great honor and responsibility and source of joy and pride that I was able to secure access to Beatles music for the Fifth Beatle. So we are developing it as an 8-part miniseries that will be filled with Beatles music, since we have access to the Beatles catalog, and will really chronicle the life story of Brian Epstein, who was gay and Jewish and from Liverpool and 26 years old when he discovered the Beatles, playing basement clubs in Liverpool, totally unprofessional, smoking on stage, goofing around on stage. And he said that, with my help, I'm going to clean these guys up. I'm going to teach them how to be professional. I'm going to get them a record deal. I'm going to break them all over the world. And they are going to be bigger than Elvis, and they're going to elevate pop music into an art form. I mean, that's the story of the Fifth Beatle. It's and he did that while being gay at a time where it was against the law, Jewish at a time of pervasive anti-Semitism, and for Liverpool, at a time before the Beatles when it didn't have any cultural influence. So, in many ways, Brian is the ultimate example of passion and persistence. He was the least likely guy to do what he did. Everybody told him, your dreams are stupid, and people like you don't do things like that.
Right.
And that's my personal connection to the story. I was born in New York City. My parents are immigrants. My family is originally from India. And when I was growing up, I was supposed to be a doctor or an engineer or go into finance or join my family business, which would have seen me involved in agriculture and food products. Those are the kind of things that are expected of young Indian immigrant children, who have been given some opportunity in this new world. And I'm not supposed to write comic books and produce Broadway musicals based on rock albums. That was crazy. Those dreams were crazy.
Right.
And people like you, Vivek, don't do things like that. But the Brian Epstein story taught me that no dream is too impossible, and no person too unlikely to realize that dream.
Yeah,
so
you
I
thought you
leaned
were
into my
studying
passions.
business, but you actually were studying
That's it.
life philosophy.
And that's what I did. I leaned into my passions and I refused to give up. And that's how this cycles back to Jagged Little Pill. I thought putting that album on stage was something I was passionate about.
Always
and
the,
if it was going to take
ambassador.
8 years, well, it's not even so much the ambassador. It's just that I love what I do.
Yeah.
And that's the current thing that I'm doing,
Right.
know? We're on the, I think this is going to air by the time this airs. I think.
Well, we're live.
I know
for
we're
the
live.
DNR
So
studios.
the people who are listening live, opening night is on Thursday,
Right.
and
For
the
people who get
people
the free
getting a
podcast,
pass,
it will have
it'll been open by
past
then.
Thursday, yeah.
But this is very much in it's my moment right now
Right.
for Jagged Little Pill.
Yeah, I know.
So it's I really don't believe in going through your life as a business person, marketing and promoting your projects. You just got to talk about what you love. And right now I'm in love with the thing that I'm most involved in.
Yeah.
And that's Jagged Little Pill.
Fair enough.
Hopefully, you'll have me on a year from now and we'll be talking about Fifth Beatle. But right now, Jagged,
Bring it full
it's
circle.
all about Jagged for me, you
Yeah.
know, and I'm proud of that. I'm really proud of that.
What are you wearing on Thursday to opening night?
That is a good question. The opening night party, we have said it's going to be rock chic.
Oh.
So is the attire, and I guess I'm still figuring that out a little bit.
Well, you better
My
get on it. It's
teenage
Monday.
Vivek would have had no problem with rock chic. Now that I'm in my 40s, I have to think about it a little bit deeper. So
Is Alanis hasn't had her baby yet, has she?
she has.
She
yeah,
did?
Oh yeah, she has 3 kids.
Because it's brand new, right?
Yeah.
Last I saw her, she was very
Winter
pregnant.
Mercy is his name.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is she going to be able to be at opening night?
Oh, yes. In fact, she's here in New York right now, or she's arriving any moment now if she's not already here. She's doing a show tonight at the Apollo, and she's going to be playing the entirety of Jagged Little Pill. And, as a sort of kickoff to our opening week. So she's performing Jagged Little Pill, and that will follow with an interview with rock journalist Alan Light, who will be interviewing her about Jagged Little Pill. And we're viewing that moment as kind of the kickoff to our week. She's going to be on Fallon Jimmy Fallon talking about Jagged Little Pill in 2 days. And then certainly on Thursday, she's going to be joining us for all the festivities for opening night.
I am furious with myself that I didn't know about this Apollo show and
all good.
pull every string to get myself in.
It is one of those things that sold out in a hot minute.
I bet. Yeah, I saw her
So-
perform when her second album came out in '99, I want to say, in the Key Arena in Seattle when she was on tour. Her opening act was Garbage. It was
Amazing, right?
Yeah, it was.
She took Radiohead on their first tour.
Yeah,
in the
they
US.
opened for her.
Radiohead opened for Alanis. Yeah, she's amazing. She's always taken out great artists, and she's always had a lot of. She's prescient. She's something.
Do you know, are any of the I want to say kids, even though most of them are not that far. It's funny, I'm exactly directly between the ages of the Healy kids and the Healy parents,
Right.
In terms of the actors.
Yeah.
And I have friends in both of those generations that feel like my peers. So it's a little bit weird to see my friend Derek and
Sure,
my
yeah,
friend
yeah.
Elizabeth
I love
playing mother and
Yeah,
son. But is Alanis bringing any of the quote unquote kids onto the stage with her for?
I don't know what her plans are in terms of bringing her family to the theater. I mean, I know they.
I didn't even
here
mean
with
her kids. I
Yeah.
meant the cast of the show.
Oh, tonight?
Yeah.
At the Apollo show? No, I think tonight is about her.
Uh-huh.
Thursday is going to be about us, and tonight
Yeah.
is about her. So I think that's many of our cast are going.
Yeah, I can
tonight is an off
imagine. Mm-hmm.
night, so they will certainly be there. But the plan is for this to be about Alanis Morissette performing Jagged Little Pill. Thursday is about our cast.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're going to do that. That wasn't the intention for tonight.
I want to spend some time talking about this cast because, you've got your theater veterans like Elizabeth Stanley, who's been, around since she was playing the teenage, she was in Crybaby as
she's amazing.
As the ingenue, and now she's playing the suburban mom. And then you have so many quote unquote kids making their Broadway debuts.
Yeah.
And then you have the sort of middle grounders who are both young and really, really experienced, like Lauren Patton and Catherine Gallagher, who grew up in the business. And I think that the word fresh just keeps coming into my mind when I think about this cast,
We did that on
because
purpose.
it
cast
doesn't
with that in
feel
mind,
green.
yeah.
And I think that in many, even in the food industry, green and fresh are often synonymous.
Right.
But this cast is vibrant, but it doesn't feel rough around the edges at all, except like in the good ways, you know. It feels like you could go to this show dressed in an evening gown, and you could go to this show dressed in super short cut-off shorts that somebody's mom would think is inappropriate, and
that's why it's difficult to pick the opening night outfit.
Oh yeah,
why
don't you wear a suit jacket and super short cut-off shorts?
I don't think I'm going to be doing that, but thanks for the advice, Laura.
The social media surrounding, of course.
No, they're amazing. And look, we what you are describing is something that, from a producing standpoint, we worked very hard on. You know, when we were in casting sessions, we really wanted to accomplish that. We wanted it to feel fresh and vibrant, but not green. You know, and again, I keep going back to this word family. And we really looked at composition. We wanted there to be some people who've done Broadway before and who are seasoned, that can really, and that we would get to know that they are decent human beings and good people, and knowing that they will help to support some of the younger, the kids, if you will, who are making their Broadway debuts. You know, so really have a balance of that, and knowing that we were working hard to put a family together who would support each other, and having some of those younger, you know, fresher Broadway debut folks injecting some really like vibrancy, as you put it, into the rest of the cast, so that, you know, the new people to Broadway would give it a sense of rebirth, and the people who've done Broadway before would give it a sense of consistency and wisdom.
Right.
And that, to me, makes for a great family.
And
that's what we tried to do with this cast.
Speaking of family, have either LaShawne's, who's Celia Rose Gooding's mom, or Peter Gallagher, who's Catherine Gallagher's father, both Broadway veterans. LaShawne's has a Tony. I don't know if Peter does. I saw him in Guys and Dolls in 1992 when I was 13, by the way. And that was before Catherine, who is now my friend, was born, which blows both of our minds. But
I mean, Peter Gallagher has been on the Broadhurst stage. I mean, yeah.
So, like, have they been around a lot, or is it very much like show family, not you know?
Yeah, they've been amazing. I mean, they have not been around a lot, to answer your question. They are definitely not, you know, a stage mom and stage dad in that sense.
Well, their kids are adults.
But they have been around and incredibly supportive.
Yeah.
They were both there with, you know, for first night of previews to support their kids.
Yes,
you know, they
LaShawne's
tweet about it regularly.
Yeah.
They're so lovely about that. So they have been incredibly involved, incredibly supportive, incredibly passionate about what we're doing. But also they've let their kids be kids and define their own voices.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, those eyebrows of Catherine's will never let her get completely away from her dad.
But you know, I personally think there's something really beautiful about the fact that, you know, that Peter was on the Broadhurst stage.
Do you know which show that was?
I'm forgetting right now, but he was with Jack Lemmon, and I forget what the show was. But it would be pretty easy to look it up if you're.
I'm looking it up.
Yeah.
I want to also talk about how queer this show is. This is a show that is about a quote unquote traditional suburban family.
Yeah.
But there is the show basically opens with two girls kissing. You know, it's like very early in the show.
Yeah.
And a lot of the ensemble is either gender neutral or in some other way like non-conforming. There's a lot of, it goes beyond punk rock. It's like there is a lot of it's not just the design. It's like the actual looks and like facial, it's like piercings, tattoos, things that I can only assume go beyond costume. And both the look and the tone of the show feel like this is a touchstone for queer youth who are trying to understand their place, not just in the world, but like against the world.
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you for saying that. You know, I mean, again, we hope that we are reflecting the real world here, you know, and that if you go through the real world thinking that those people aren't all around you, then you're wrong. You know, then you're kidding yourself, or you're not opening your eyes. So, you know, I like to think that our show is what you just described, but I also hope that it's just a reflection of reality, you know, that we're not like making a big statement there, but we are being inclusive, because the real world is an inclusive place, whether people want to admit it or not.
It's both of those things, because it is the way the real world works. But I think that, you know, Mary Jane, Elizabeth Stanley's character, she doesn't see that as the real world.
Sure.
She sees all of the moms at Soul Cycle who are in their puffy vests and
she comes to learn that she's wrong.
That she comes to learn that she's wrong, right?
That's her
and
journey.
I think that there are other people who are so embedded in quote unquote the real world that they forget that there are people that, I don't know. I think that it can be both a touchstone for an oppressed group and a reflection of the real world.
Of course.
Every good, responsible piece of art, I think, should be inclusive because that's the way the world looks. But that's not the way that Broadway happens. It's better now than it used to be, but,
Yeah, and this goes back to your earlier questions about my philosophy in the world and with what I do for a living, unlike what many of my family members wanted and what might have been expected for me, I didn't become a doctor, so I'm not a doctor and I'm not involved in politics, so I don't make policy in the world, and I'm not an activist by strictest definition. There are moments where I think how can I make a difference in the world? Mm-hmm. And the way, I love entertainment and I'm a producer and a writer. So what I can do is put work out into the world that can spark conversation, hopefully inspire, and maybe if we've done both conversation and inspiration, effect a little bit of change.
How's your family doing now with what you do for a living?
I don't want to put too many words in their mouth, but I think they're pretty proud of me.
Yeah.
My wife has been incredibly supportive. She is, her name is Tracy Dennis Tiwary, and she is a neuroscientist who's very much involved in teen anxiety and using new technologies and figuring out how tech is affecting our teenagers. So
that's my biggest thing. Along with growth mindset, neurology is
she's at dennis-tiwary.com.
Great. I'm looking her up.
So the issues that we deal with Jagged Little Pill are very much issues that she cares about. Mm-hmm. So I know she is a big supporter and loves the show. So I like to think that she's pretty proud of me.
What about the people who wanted you to be a doctor?
Well, unfortunately, my parents passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
So they're not here to see it, but I believe they're up there cheering me on.
Yeah.
And I have to say, my mom was a huge fan of Broadway, and there's no question that I got my love of Broadway because my mom was taking me to Broadway musicals ever since I was a little kid.
What was the first one you ever saw, or that you remember seeing?
I honestly, I will tell you this: I have a distinct memory of walking out of both Cats and Starlight Express and turning to my mom and say, "One day I want to be involved in something like that," and not knowing what I meant, but what I probably meant was I wanted to produce because I knew I didn't want to act, or in the case of Starlight Express, I didn't want to be a roller skater. But I said I want to be involved in something like that. So those two shows were quite seminal for me. But I've been going to shows ever since I was a kid,
a baby.
So I really couldn't tell you.
That's so funny because Cats and Starlight Express. If you asked me to say two shows that Jagged Little Pill is distinctly not like, I might say Cats and Starlight Express.
But here's the thing, right? I keep going back to being inspirational. Those shows inspired me.
Of course.
I think Cats in some ways was the first piece of truly mainstream immersive theater. There were cats coming out of the walls. I was mind boggled as a little kid. So and Starlight Express was a show that used new technologies in ways that theater hadn't done before. It took costuming and world building to a whole new level. To me, those shows were incredibly inspiring.
Right. Well,
so,
and we shouldn't
I'm
try
trying
to
inspire in different ways. I'm trying to spark conversation about issues, but it's the same thing I'm trying to do. I hope that people will walk out of my shows inspired. As a producer, that is my goal when I create new art. When I look about potential projects that I could work on, I keep asking myself that question: could this show spark conversation?
Yeah.
And could that conversation potentially spark some inspiration?
Right.
And could that inspiration potentially affect a little change? And if the answer to those three questions are yes, then that's a project that I'll pursue. That's how I choose my projects.
That's such a cool philosophy, and I love that you know it so well. I think if everybody had their life's purpose in an elevator pitch, and could run every idea they had through that life's philosophy, the world would be at least more focused. Mine is I want to spread joy through contagious enthusiasm. And people think Broadway's my thing. Broadway's just the thing that I'm enthusiastic about right now in my life. But it doesn't have to be Broadway. It has to be joyful and contagious enthusiasm. Those are the things.
Yeah, I love that.
Let's talk about Musicians on Call.
Thank you for asking.
You are a founder of an organization that, Well, you tell us.
Yeah, so I am the co-founder of Musicians on Call. For those of you who are listening, you can find us at musiciansoncall.org. We just celebrated our 20-year anniversary.
Wow.
So 20 years ago, I co-founded this organization with my dear friend and brother, Michael Solomon, and we bring music and entertainment into healthcare institutions. It's primarily bringing live musicians to perform at patient bedsides and thereby lightening the mood in hospitals and complementing the healing process for people who need it most. And it's something I'm incredibly proud of. I've been very blessed to have a career where I've been able to do a lot of really interesting things with really interesting people, from comic books to Broadway theater. But I say it all the time, the thing I'm actually most proud of is being a co-founder of Musicians on Call. And, I mentioned earlier that my parents passed away. Mm-hmm. And really, for me, the heart of Musicians on Call is my mom. She, as I mentioned earlier, she introduced me to Broadway and gave me my love of the arts. And she loved music, and she lay dying in a hospital bed a little over 20 years ago.
Wow.
And she was here in New York, best city in the world, at some of the best in the best hospital in the world, overseen by some of the best doctors in the world, and still her end of days was pretty grim. And, I don't kid myself, the healing power of music would not have saved her life. Cancer made sure of that. But if there was music in those rooms those days, she would have passed away a little happier.
Yeah.
Her end of days would have been a little bit brighter, and she deserved that. And for me, that was the passion behind Musicians on Call, is I watched somebody like my mom who had the best, and still the end of her life in those hospital rooms was grim, much less people who don't have the opportunities my mother had. So I wanted to use music and the arts to make life for people who are in need of healing just a little bit better.
Yeah.
And my mom was the extreme example. We don't just play in hospice, although we do hospice, but we do everything from pediatrics to adult wards to hospice. Anywhere in any healthcare institution that healing is needed, we exist. And that's that's maybe a very comprehensive thing to say, but it's more or less true.
Yeah.
Like we have programs in every single of the 50 states. We are constantly expanding and supported by literally everyone from Bruce Springsteen to Britney Spears.
Yeah.
But the lifeblood of our organization are the local musicians who go into hospitals and dedicate their time on daily or weekly bases to spread that healing power.
We are at the very end of the show, but I'm making a donation to Musicians on Call.
Thank you so much.
Everybody go see Jagged Little Pill at the Broadhurst Theater.
Thank you so much.